Here we go with the part 2 of the offseason in 2004. These are the retirements. As you can see, Tim Brown, Curtis Conway, some of the bigger names, Aeneas Williams, Emmitt Smith, finally calling it quits. I don't really control who retires, who doesn't. I don't really play any games of changing ages yet so far. Just kind of letting players decide to retire. There, Ricky Watters used to be with the Patriots last year after a trade with Seattle. Was able to play in the Super Bowl, but came up short. There's Chris Carter there, finally retiring after his year in Washington. As free agency begins, Adam Schefter is here to report. Our first major signing this offseason was the quarterback from Tennessee, Steve Mcnair. He had offers from Miami, New Orleans, and the New York Giants. But here it is, he has decided to go with the Miami Dolphins. This was a unique signing because I thought the Giants would have been the best position for him to win. I thought the Saints were essentially a QB away. I mean, Aaron Brooks was decent, but Josh Booty was able to deliver them a playoff season, but probably would not have gotten much further than that with being a 60 overall. And so the Miami Dolphins have a standout defense in a very tough division. I mean, the Bills just won the Super Bowl 2 years ago. The Patriots are prime. And the Jets are also not a bad team either. But Steve Mcnair is going to make that division so much more competitive. Next up is Carrie Collins, the Giants quarterback, who refused their offer and decided to test free agency. He received offers from both the Cleveland Browns and the Tennessee Titans, and has chosen to go to the Cleveland Browns, joining Bill Cowher to try to turn that team around to be more competitive. The AFC North was the worst division in football last year. The Ravens were 8-8 and won the division. So right now, it's anybody's game in that division, so we will see if the Browns with Carrie Collins will make that change. Wide receiver Jimmy Smith with the Jaguars decides to sign with the Philadelphia Eagles, giving them one of their more premier pass receivers than they've had in the past. They've had some decent ones that have performed way beyond their overall, but not really a standout receiver like Jimmy Smith. Last individual player highlight here is Bubba Franks leaving Green Bay to go with the Indianapolis Colts, the number 1 team in the AFC last year, just getting defeated in the divisional round by the Super Bowl champions, Houston Texans. I think this is a great pairing, so it's Jon Snow and Bubba Franks as the Colts' tight end. The team that takes the crown here with free agency was the New England Patriots, getting a backup quarterback for Brady with Quincy Carter from Dallas, getting Cedric Martin from their divisional opponents, the New York Jets, who is a 90 overall running back who's going to give them the running game that they have not had these last 2 seasons. Plaxico Burress from the Steelers and Marcus Pollard from the Colts have been battling injuries these last 2 seasons. Pollard was out for the majority of his first season that I played, so 2002-2003, and then he was injured for the remainder of last season, very early in the year. Plaxico Burress was injured for the entire season this last year, and both of them I decreased their injury and toughness to 60 flat, because I figured that if they got that bad of an injury, it's going to be hard to come back in full force. They might be a dynamic player on the field, but their odds of staying healthy with such severe injuries are lower. But the Patriots gambled on them, and they were able to acquire them this offseason. We will see if they spend more time injured or on the field. Now, the surprises were Warren Sapp from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and then Champ Bailey. Those 2 defensive players had Sapp had about 5 or 6 teams going for him, and Champ Bailey had over 10. I did not expect the Patriots to get both, but they did. So Champ Bailey and Ty Law are the New England Patriots defensive backs, 2 corners that are basically 2 of the top 3 cornerbacks in the league. Yes, they added Alvin McKinley because I didn't think they'd get Warren Sapp too, but they ended up really really winning here in free agency. So I'm interested to see how the Patriots team shapes up next year, because with this much talent, they should be a Super Bowl contender. Here's an overview of the offseason. I'll go ahead and show the different teams, who they acquired, where they came from. And anytime I do this, normally if a player is above an 80 or a top-notch player, I usually have at least 2 teams with the same free agent point value. This way, I don't want to decide where a player goes. If they're a good player, I want them to make the decision. I don't want one team to outbid the other, so I basically make sure that their point total is the same. So that's how they are decided, and that creates randomness for me. So as we can see, as for some updates, Jake Plummer and Jay Feidler goes to Jacksonville to be with David Garrard, put some pressure on him to perform better. I believe my addition with Chris Redmond to Pittsburgh was a coach decision because Lovie Smith was with the Rams, likely knew Chris Redmond, and decided to bring him to Pittsburgh as either the starter or maybe a backup quarterback, depending on how their draft goes. Dilfer failed in Cleveland, now is backing up Drew Bledsoe in Buffalo, and then the rest of them are likely going to be backup quarterbacks. Aaron Brooks is with Tim Couch now in Tennessee. We'll see if either of them are the starting quarterback or if they decide to draft a rookie. When we look at the running backs, we know about Cedric Martin. Jamal Lewis was kind of a disappointment in Baltimore, and now he is Tiki Barber's backup in New York. Jamel White had some injuries with Cleveland. He is a superstar dev trait, but he ended up leaving the Browns, deciding to be the backup for Edgar and James in Indianapolis. So they're still gearing up, trying to win their Super Bowl there with the Colts. Trung candidate was a solid Rams running back when Marshall Faulk was injured, but he ends up going to Cleveland. Not necessarily the replacement for Jamel White, but at least someone to fill that role a little bit better. Ron Dane from the Giants is now a Charger with Travis Gervais, which Travis Gervais was very active when Warwick Dunn was injured and TJ Duckett was injured. Falcons had a lot of injuries last year, and so there were a lot of players stepping up, and that did relate a little bit to their number 1 overall pick winning record that they ended up having. There you can see the fullbacks. I mean, no one really dynamic there. I mean, Max Strong going from Seattle to the Chargers is probably the only iconic change. Then when we look at our next list here of free agents, I mentioned Burris went to New England. The Broncos ended up with Joe Jurevicius and Keenan McCardell from the Buccaneers. Northcutt going from Cleveland to Oakland. Pinkston, Eagles to Steelers. Bengals are losing a few receivers here. Nothing incredibly dynamic sticking out. As you can see, some offensive line transitions. Probably Adam Timmerman was the best offensive line prospect, and he went from the Rams to the Arizona Cardinals. Sean O'Hara leaving Cleveland for the Washington team. Tight ends, there were a lot of exchanges here. We see one of my big ones was Byron Chamberlain leaving Minnesota mostly because he ended up becoming the tight end number 2, with Dallas Clark becoming the primary tight end target in Minnesota. Matt Circone leaving Minnesota as well for Washington. Mark Bruner, the Steelers tight end, he dropped so many passes for me, but since Bill Cowher is now the Browns coach, I figured the Steeler player going to Cleveland following his coach was a fine transition. Christian Furia going from New England to Jacksonville, kind of getting replaced by Marcus Pollard. Aaron Shea going from Cleveland to the Philadelphia Eagles, kind of replacing Jeff Thomason, going to Oakland. He's about 35-year-old, so I figured they got a little bit younger in that transaction. Now we move into some of the more defensive side of the ball. We can see Grady Jackson going to Pittsburgh, McKinley going to the Patriots, Sapp going to the Patriots. Linebackers, Rob Morris is probably the most prolific one. I think he was originally with the Colts. I don't have his previous team in that slot there, but going to the Cardinals was a good addition, one of the best middle linebackers available. As we can see on the defensive end, there wasn't as many changes. Big winner there with Jacksonville getting Jonathan Abraham, who rejected the Jets' offer. I forget which player it was, but the Jets used their franchise tag, so they couldn't get Abraham to stay. But now he chose Jacksonville, and that was a surprise to me. I thought Abraham would have gone to a different team. I forget which teams were vying for him, but he had a handful going for him as the best pass rusher available. As for the defensive backs, Deltha O'Neal was the next best cornerback next to Champ Bailey, and he ended up going to the Jets. Jason Sehorn leaving the second worst team Lions, going to Dallas. Not much of an improvement there. Bobby Taylor leaving Philadelphia for Atlanta. Kind of a veteran, swapping teams there. As you can see, the punters and kickers, most of them are not really dynamic changes, but just sharing some transactions that took place in the free agency period here in 2004. Our next video will be going into the draft. I'll be sharing some reasons why certain players were picked, some of the thought process behind it as the teams start to develop their identity.